This is the true story of how a government threatened, manipulated and deliberately terrified its citizens for a bug they knew was no worse than the flu. The government I'm describing is the British government, but I have no doubt that the facts I'm outlining here would fit a number of other countries too. When the coronavirus was first identified, the British government's advisors decided that it was a dangerous infection and they put it into the same general category as rabies, Ebola fever and a few other deadly diseases. But then, on March the 19th, the public health bodies in the UK, together with the government's Advisory Committee on Dangerous Pathogens, decided that the coronavirus should no longer be classified as a, quotes, high consequence infectious disease, close quotes. So they downgraded it and effectively put it back into the same category as the flu. That was on March the 19th. This decision was rather tucked away on the government's website, and although I put the decision on my website, the mass media ignored it. I'll show in a minute why they did so. It was also announced that in future it would not be necessary to manage patients with the infection in special treatment centres. It was effectively decided that the infection didn't need to be regarded as anything more hazardous than the flu, and that it could be dealt with in the same way that the flu is managed. I confess I was rather excited by this decision, which totally vindicated my original view, based on a mixture of information and experience, that the bug was nowhere near as dangerous as had been advertised. I naively assumed that the government would back off, stop pretending that we were threatened by the plague, and let the country get back to normal. I now feel rather foolish for making that assumption. I should have realised that something bigger was underway from the fact that the government didn't publish this decision for 2 days. A bigger game was already in play, and the government was planning to put huge chunks of the nation under house arrest. And then the emergency bill was passed by a compliant House of Commons, which gave Comrade Boris and his bunch of ministers and advisors more power than any government has ever had in Britain. The House of Commons handed total control of the country to Boris Johnson, Neil Ferguson and Dominic Cummings. What a trio. When the coronavirus bug was downgraded, the government had already decided to take full advantage of the situation. And the flu-type bug was used as a weapon to trigger a coup that would give the government total control over the people. I've already described many of the astonishing things that have happened, but yesterday I was shown a document which made my blood run cold. The document is entitled Options for Increasing Adherence to Social Distancing Measures, and it's dated the 22nd of March 2020, 3 days after the bug had been downgraded. And when it was clear that it was no longer going to put 8 million people in hospital and kill 500,000 people, as had been predicted by Ferguson and his chums at Imperial College. The committee responsible for the document was named the Scientific Pandemic Influenza Group on Behaviour, so they presumably knew that we were dealing with a type of flu. The document I'm going to quote from was prepared by a bunch of behavioural scientists working for SAGE, a surely appropriate James Bond-like acronym for an organisation which deserves about as much respect as SMERSH or Spectre. The full title of SAGE is the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, and the first thing we need to do when we get our country back is to disband it. I feel qualified to say this since, with all due modesty, the evidence shows that right from the start I've been rather more accurate than SAGE, and if an old man in a chair can produce better advice than a government committee, then it's probably a good idea to get rid of the government committee. Anyway, that's all for the future. What concerns me at the moment is the document prepared by the Behavioural Science Subgroup, a document which shows how the government was advised to control the way we think and to manipulate the way we behave. In the end, I think our politicians and their advisors deliberately set out to create mass hysteria. I think the advisors were perhaps remembering the way teenagers became hysterical when they'd watched the film The Exorcist. The document was designed to offer advice to SAGE itself, and here are some quotes, which I assure you are not taken out of context. First, under the heading Perceived Threat, the government's advisors wrote, open quotes, "A substantial number of people still do not feel sufficiently personally threatened," close quotes. And they suggested that the media be used to increase a sense of personal threat. So now you know who was pulling the strings which kept the TV and newspapers building up the scare story, and not, for example, publicising that March the 19th report that I mentioned. In the old days, this was called propaganda. Actually, we should still call it propaganda. And so now we know that those inflammatory, scary headlines were written under orders from the government. To sweeten the deal, the government agreed to purchase massive newspaper advertising for 3 months. The government's advertising, paid for with our money, replaced the advertising which was lost because of the lockdown and social distancing. Financially, the newspapers have come out of this very well. I suspect the BBC will be rewarded for its propaganda by having the threats to remove the licence fee removed. And it's perhaps fair to suppose that a few editors will also be expecting knighthoods in a future honours list. And the advisors went on to say, open quotes, "The perceived level of personal threat needs to be increased among those who are complacent, using hard-hitting emotional messaging," close quotes. In other words, the behavioural scientists advised the government to make people more frightened of a bug which they knew had just been downgraded to flu level. Second, under the heading Incentivization, the government's advisors wrote, open quotes, "Communication strategies should provide social approval for desired behaviours and promote social approval within the community," close quotes. The other side of that coin, as the advisors doubtless knew, is that people who behaved inappropriately and who preferred to be guided by the facts would be demonised and shunned. No one seemed worried about that, and in due course the government deliberately split communities into two, those who believed all the lies they were told by the government and those who sought out the truth. Third, under the heading Coercion, the advisors we paid for said, open quotes, "Consideration should be given to the use of social disapproval, but with a strong caveat around unwanted negative consequences." Well, they managed the social approval, but they didn't do much about avoiding the unwanted negative consequences, and they damn well knew that people would be abused. Let's hope that some of the unfortunate souls who suffered because they forgot to go out and clap on Thursday evenings will eventually get over the harassment and abuse they no doubt received from their neighbours. I know a little about abuse. The minute I started exposing the truth about the coronavirus, I was viciously attacked and unscrupulous attempts were made to destroy my reputation. I've dealt with some of these attacks on my website, and I'll deal with more in a special video I'm preparing about precisely how individuals are being monstered these days. Fourth, under the heading Enablement, the behavioural scientists pointed out that the public were being asked to give up valued activities and access to resources for an extended period, and suggested that, as compensation, we should be given access to opportunities for social contact and rewarding activities that could be undertaken in the home, and to resources such as food. I like that last bit. I don't know what the rewarding activities were. I don't think the government ever got round to that, other than the stupid clapping and the drawing of rainbows. But I'm grateful to the scientists' suggestion that we should be allowed access to resources such as food. Very generous of them. And so, in response to this advice, Boris Johnson's government deliberately terrified the voters because of a flu bug and allowed them access to food. It's no doubt in my mind that Comrade Boris's behaviour has been criminal. Here's why I think that. First, hundreds of thousands of citizens have been terrified out of their wits by the propaganda. Since the word pandemic is now fashionable, let me just say there will be a pandemic of mental illness and suicide. Second, the level of terror is so great that many people are unwilling to go to hospital when they're ill, parents won't let their children go to school, and teachers won't teach them. The absurd restrictions which will create mental havoc amongst children are a direct result of all this dangerous gibberish. Millions won't want to go back to work. The economic and social consequences will push Britain back centuries. Civilization, as we know it, has been wrecked for a bug that was downgraded on March the 19th and is no more dangerous than the flu. And third, the people in charge of our hospitals are still following the social distancing rules that seem to have been created because no one listened to the expert advice lowering the risk level of the coronavirus. They still seem to believe that the coronavirus is as deadly as Ebola or the plague. Have they too been manipulated into a state of terror? Doctors and nurses must, by now, know the truth, and yet operations are still being cancelled and cancer patients are still abandoned and left in limbo by a health system which seems irrationally obsessed by the coronavirus. It's no wonder that the media are busy demonising Sweden, where the government had no formal lockdown and have suffered far fewer deaths. It's no wonder that the British government has exaggerated the number of deaths from the coronavirus. They must now be desperate that the truth never comes out. The bottom line is simple: to make sure that you aren't unduly terrified by your own government and to protect yourself against manipulation. Remember the slogan I introduced for my video about brainwashing. Distrust the government, avoid mass media, fight the lies. You won't see me anywhere other than here because I'm banned by all mainstream media. I'm banned for the sin of having been proved right too many times about a whole range of contentious issues which have embarrassed governments, drug companies and so on. My intention here is quite simple. It's to provide regular, accurate information and hopefully, through knowledge, some reassurance. You can help spread the truth and the word by pressing the share button. I've no idea what it does, but I'm told it helps. And ask everyone you know to watch the videos and visit the website. Some people will be angry and upset with you because the truth is often uncomfortable, and if they've already been terrified by the government, they might not want to think of any alternative. But if enough of us speak out, then eventually the people who are destroying our world will go into reverse. They'll have to. It's touch and go, but it's still our world. I can't get exposure anywhere else, so it's up to you to spread the word. Thank you for watching An Old Man in a Chair, and thanks for all your support. I've not authorised any ads or any sponsorship, and you can find more truths on a range of issues on www.vernoncoleman.com, which also has no ads and no sponsorship. And let's spread the truth as widely as we can. Ask people you know to watch these videos, and then the truth will be out. Thank you very much for watching.